So let me talk a little bit about a strike. So just to be clear again, a notice of intention to strike is not the same thing as a strike. You're being asked to weigh in on whether the bargaining unit is still supportive of a strike. Things that happen at the bargaining table could change whether there will be a strike, but certainly the notice of intention to strike puts you on the road to a strike. The purpose of a strike is to bring economic pressure on Kaiser and to bring patient pressure and public pressure on Kaiser to help resolve the labor dispute. And so what that means is that everybody needs to participate. If you are unified, you will be strongest. If you are unified, you will make the biggest impression. If you're not unified, if people go to work and cross the picket line, Kaiser will be able to continue its operations much more easily. Many unions talk about strike breakers as taking food out of the mouths of the children of the strikers. And that is somewhat rhetorical, but it is also somewhat literally true. If in fact you are going to work and breaking the strike, you're making it harder for the strike to be successful. You are making money while your coworkers are on the picket line sacrificing for your collective future. That is the reason why it's important for every single person to participate in the strike and to do so by withholding their labor. One of the issues that's come up is why is it necessary for there to be picketing now before the strike begins and again after the strike ends? And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that publicity and picketing and patient pressure does help express the strength and the support in the community for the Guild and your demands. And the second thing is that we know from actual qualitative research that was done by the Guild that your patients will be supportive of Guild members if you go on strike, but only as long as you've done a number of things. Number one, explaining to the members, the Kaiser participants and their beneficiaries, their kids, their spouses, why it is that you have a labor dispute, and explaining to them that you have in fact tried to resolve the dispute with Kaiser through regular channels at the negotiating table, and that hasn't been successful. They also want to know that you have tried all of the steps short of striking before you go to a strike. Well, one of the steps short of striking that unions frequently use are informational pickets and handbilling, where you appeal to the public to put pressure on the employer without actually withholding services. That is why during this period before the strike begins, you are continuing with the picketing and the handbilling. Now, with respect to picketing after the strike begins, picketing is important for a number of different reasons. First of all, you want patients to understand why they're being inconvenienced. If you're not at the pharmacy working, they're not going to understand why they're being inconvenienced. Having you on the picket line is a tangible sign that you're on strike. Okay? The fact that you're there handing out leaflets explaining why you're on strike, that you're there to answer questions about why you're on strike, also helps them understand why they're being inconvenienced, helps them understand why there's a labor dispute that makes their lives less simple and more complicated. It's also another way of bringing pressure on Kaiser because people are attack Kaiser, especially people who are members of working families and labor union families, and say, you know what, I don't feel comfortable crossing a picket line. You made me cross a picket line. You sure as heck better get this thing resolved because I don't want to do it again. In addition to that, if people are educated about your dispute, the qualitative research indicates they'll be supportive. They'll call Kaiser and say, you need to get this solved. You're inconveniencing me, and it's you, Kaiser, who are the problem. You need to fix it. So that's why picketing is important from a message conveyance sort of a perspective. But there's a second purpose for picketing, and that is to show solidarity with one another. When you're on the picket line, you are showing, I support the strike. I support my coworkers who are withholding their services. And you create peer pressure on someone who might think of crossing the picket line and going to work not to, because now their coworkers are going to see, oh, person X is not standing with us and joining us and trying to make our lives better. Instead, person X is putting his or her personal convenience or personal preference about whether the labor dispute should or shouldn't be resolved ahead of the interest of the entire bargaining unit. That is a very, very important part of why you need to picket during the strike. The final thing is you need to sort of look those people in the face and say, you know, that's not acceptable behavior. You don't have to say it in so many words, but just looking them eye to eye as they go to work, crossing your picket line, sends that message, and that's a very, very important part of this process. That's why it's important to picket after the strike begins, assuming that there is a strike. If I picket, am I going to have to picket for my entire shift? Well, ideally, what you really want is you want people on the picket line all of the time, and you know, if not every person can be on the picket line for every minute of his or her shift, you know, that's sort of the way things play out. But the idea is that you want to have a strong presence. You want to have a strong presence on the picket line all of the time. You especially want strong presence on the picket line during the time period during which anyone who might be thinking of crossing the picket line would be reporting to work. So that's an especially strong time. You also want it any time that a patient might be going to access the facility so that they have the opportunity to be educated about the labor dispute. So that's the ideal, and that's the goal of requiring people to picket. So that's I think the answer there. Again, as I said, the most critical time for people to be picketing is during the time period when patients would be accessing the pharmacies, accessing the medical centers, and during times when pharmacists would be reporting to work. In terms of medical coverage, if you're on strike in the middle of a month, normally the way that works is that your medical coverage will continue through the end of the month, but that's going to be it. After that, you're on strike. The employer is not providing you with any benefits. In addition to that, unless you have a legitimate reason to be inside a Kaiser facility, you shouldn't be in a Kaiser facility while you're on strike. So public outreach, picketing, handbilling, a notice of intention to strike, all of these things are tools in your belt. A strike would be another tool in your belt, and this will be deployed assuming that the bargaining unit indicates its support in the vote that's going on now, and that there isn't sufficient progress at the table to warrant it's either postponing it or canceling it. And hopefully what will happen is that all of these different tools will bring about a good, successful resolution of this dispute.